A little bit about the background of the lecture. India and Southeast Asia have shared a long history going back more than 2000 years. Ananda Kumaraswamy writes that Indian contacts in Southeast Asia may have been made centuries before the beginning of the Common Era, as can be gleaned from several texts. For instance, Suvarnabhumi, Sumatra, is mentioned in the Jatak, epics, and the Mahavamsha, and the sea route must have been familiar even before the commencement of the general eastward extension of Indian culture. Culture spread via trade routes that linked India with southern Burma, central and southern Siam, which is Thailand, the Malay Peninsula and Sumatra, to Java, Philippines, Lower Cambodia, and Champa. The Pali and Sanskrit languages and the Indian script, together with Buddhism, Brahmanism, Hinduism, were transmitted from direct contact as well as through sacred texts and Indian literature. India's long history with Southeast Asia may be traced through trade and cultural and political exchanges. To broaden the scope of CSMVS's interaction with the neighboring region and strengthen ties with cultural institutions, the museum decided to launch its Southeast Asia initiative, and we're at the fourth of the edition today. It's a one-of-a-kind program in India, probably not undertaken in any institution here yet. Particularly after what was a profound exchange that Dr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, our Director General, had with the Bangkok Museum during his visit there, and the strong connections between the two countries that he explored through their collections, we have arrived here. The Indian linkages are so many. Ramayana and Mahabharata are integral to several Southeast Asian societies. Tamil is a widely spoken language. India's influence was carried forth through Hinduism, Buddhism, art, architecture, language, and law. In keeping with this historical knowledge sharing, the museum felt that it was crucial to invite scholars from Southeast Asia and who are researching in the area of Southeast Asia to deliver lectures here and enlighten us, for us to be able to create a strong data bank for the future. I'm also happy to share here that after the big Ancient World Gallery project, which I know all of us are eagerly awaiting this year, CSMVS hopes to have our next big blockbuster exhibition on India's connection with Southeast Asia. And with this big news, I would now like to introduce our speaker of this evening. Professor Parul Pandya Dhar is a professor of art history in the Department of History at the University of Delhi. She has written extensively on the history and the historiography of Indian and Southeast Asian art and architecture, and has connected histories of South and Southeast Asia. She has authored and edited several volumes, most recently a book titled Connected Histories of India and Southeast Asia, Icons, Narratives, Monuments. She is currently working on a book manuscript on artists and art practices in ancient and early medieval Deccan. She also writes a popular monthly column in the Economic Times called Ways of Seeing that reflects on issues related to art and heritage in the public domain. It is a delight to have her here today before she heads on an expedition of Western India tomorrow, I believe. Professor Parul Pandya Dhar, may I invite you to deliver your talk this evening on what is aptly titled Ideas, Motives, Images Towards a Connected Art History of South and Southeast Asia. Thank you so much.
Good evening. And first of all, Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, respected trustees of the CSMVS Museum, Dr. Ranjan, and Dr. Feroza Godrej, esteemed art historians in the audience, archaeologists, historians, students of history, archaeology, and art history, and most importantly, those who are simply interested in the subject. I think they are our most precious audience. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you for this honor. I was telling Mr. Mukherjee this morning that every time one walks into the portals of the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya in Mumbai, one is filled with a sense of admiration, deep respect, and immense hope for the future of museums in India. It's a delight, it's a one-of-a-kind museum, and the kind of long strides that it has taken over the past couple of years is really outstanding. So certainly it is an artist's and an art historian's delight to just simply spend time in the galleries of the museum, as many of us always do. Well, my pursuit of the connected histories of South and Southeast Asia, particularly its artistic manifestations embedded in the larger cultural histories and the political histories of the two regions, larger regions on both sides of the Eastern Indian Ocean, started in the late 1990s with a gentle and then progressively not so gentle nudge by Professor M.A. Dhaki, the profound scholar of Indology, and as he has aptly been called by some of his well-meaning friends and very renowned scholars in their own right, the dean of architectural historians, really. So that is a quarter century ago when he nudged me into this region. And in the initial years, I was what youngsters today call an entu cutlet. I at once felt extremely confident and extremely eager and enthusiastic to take on this region, because I was so I was so motivated by this sense of familiarity with the artworks, the sculptures, the monuments of such a vast region that we call today in monolithic terms as Southeast Asia, simply by its visual proximity. The visual proximity of its iconography, of its subject matter, that one felt, ye to ho jayega, and this is good. Now, I must admit that that pursuit did become an obsessive one for several years. It has entered into most of my books. In fact, I think 80% of them have Southeast Asia somewhere in the title. However, in inverse proportion, my confidence has plummeted. And because the complexities and the nuances of the nature of interaction between what we call South Asia today, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, I'm not going to be able to touch all of that, even if I manage some of what is today politically in India, and the large region of mainland Southeast Asia and island Southeast Asia, landlocked and, on the island Southeast Asia, is extremely complex. Number one, the archaeology of cross-cultural interaction is rapidly changing. There are new discoveries, new excavations happening, and just as we have been liberated of the British colonial rule, so have many countries, many present-day countries in Southeast Asia. So post-World War II, the archaeology and history of Southeast Asia has rapidly advanced. There were some blockages, the American-Vietnam War, and so on and so forth, the change of power in Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge, and then the UN interim, and all of that. But 1970s onwards, it is a massive, accelerated progress. So much so that how does one go about interpreting this vast array of, artifacts, sculptures, monuments, inscriptions, languages, literature, performing arts, and put them in some kind of a conceptual framework about how does one go about understanding this pre-modern, intra-Asian circulation of ideas, on account of what motives, and what kind of resulting iconographies and monuments come out of it. So all of this really makes me think of the great philosopher, intellectual, painter, poet, Guru Rabindranath Tagore, when he took his sea sojourn in 1927, largely around the islands of Indonesia, Java, Bali, but also Malaysia and a couple of other islands. And he has left behind letters called Java Jatrir Katha, Patra, and about 21 of them, and 3 poems, one of them aptly titled Sagarika. Sagarika is really the ocean, and there he talks about Bali. Now, 1927 is the time he undertook that journey, and 1926 is the year when the Greater India Society was established in Kolkata, in Eastern India. Now, so this was the time of rising passions, rising emotions about, the patriotism and nationalistic fervor. In 20 years, we were reaching 1947, and so this was at a crescendo. And this whole idea of naming the region of Southeast Asia as Greater India was something that seemed appropriate at that time, when India herself was asserting itself as, belonging to its own glory of a golden age. And this is what was one of the overriding factors of the Greater India Society, established by Kalidas Nag, and which had some very, very big stalwart scholars who today we place under the larger rubric of nationalist scholars, but I think we have to be in sympathy with the time and the context in which the Greater India Society and the Journal of the Greater India Society was established. So you have names like Neelakantha Shastri, R.C. Majumdar, H.B. Sarkar, and several others. And the nature of connections were being explored on the one hand under the French historians and archaeologists who were, holding power. The French were holding power in erstwhile Vietnam and, in Vietnam, erstwhile Champa, central and southern Vietnam, in the region of the Khmers, Cambodia. You had the Dutch in control in the region of Indonesia. And so you had French scholarship, you had Dutch scholarship, you had British scholarship, and in India, the rising fervor to understand India's contributions to the world, particularly to Southeast Asia, where there were most materially and visually obvious, became a passion. And that journey started. But Rabindranath Tagore was no ordinary mortal. And while he was part of this larger stream of Asian universalism, he was also acutely aware during this trip of the differences, of the transformations, or in other words, of the contributions of the respective Southeast Asian regions to what happens to an idea or a motif or or an object or a copy or a portable stupa or any of that when it arrives in, say, a foreign land. But for them, this is foreign, right? Now, it doesn't remain the same. And this whole idea is so beautifully captured in his line, I see India everywhere, but I cannot find it. And he's deeply appreciative of the similarity as much as the difference. And I use this as a pivot throughout the rest of the talk. One, that 1927 and 2025, we are almost a century, or just 2 years apart. It is a little retrogressive to go back to the Sone ki Chiriya approach to understanding India's contribution to the world. Of course, India is a very ancient civilization, and it has contributed immensely to developments in many parts of the world. But this kind of a cultural colonizing of Southeast Asia between two larger powers, India and China, Indianization and Sinicization, is depriving agency to Southeast Asia about what happens there. So many ideas came into India over history. Greco-Roman, Achaemenian, even, the Mesopotamians and the Harappans had connections, we know. So that scholars now are saying that is Indianizing the external influence. But what is happening in Southeast Asia, so you should think in terms of Javanization of Durga, let's say. This whole idea of localization is catching steam. So it's the process and the dialogue. The roots, R-O-U-T-E-S, and not the roots, the jad. The process and not the imposition. The transformation, the localization, and the creation of parallel universes. So from similarity, we are moving to similar difference, I should say. And to understand what the what the Ramayana or the Mahabharata or the Jatak transforms into in a different part of the world, a different part of Asia, that difference also tells us something about ourselves. And both are important. So these are some of my concerns as we move. And talking about roots, and I'm focusing on maritime exchanges, which does not mean that there were no overland exchanges. There were many. I've chosen 2 illustrations of ships out of the many more illustrations of ships at both these sites, Ajanta and Borobudur. Ajanta, of course, we all know. This is a 5th century painting from cave 17, and recently it was in the news, much in the news because the INSV, it has named it, the Indian Navy has taken it and named it INSV Kaundinya, out after Kaundinya Brahmin, who is mentioned in the inscriptions of Southeast Asia as having traversed the oceans. Of course, many, many interpretations of Kaundinya as well. So in the lower part, you see the ship with the masts carrying merchandise. It is, of course, part of the Purna Avadana. Purna is a son of a merchant, is born out of an illegitimate marriage, so on and so forth. But what is important for us are the seas and the merchandise that is shown here. And on top, and also the slide before that, this in fact is a nicer illustration of many relief sculptures of ships that are carved in the narrative relief sculptures of Borobudur in central Java in Indonesia, which is dated from approximately from 800 to 830 AD. Some scholars put it at 780 to 830 AD. Now, the double pod masts, I mean, and all of these details that you see, the extensions, the sewing of it, the rowing, and all of that, scholars have analyzed, and just like the Ajanta ship, in fact, much before that, the Borobudur ship has been actually experimented with and recreated a couple of times and set sail first up to, within the Java area and then all the way up to Madagascar. Now, of course, with the rider, that there is much artistic license in the making, in the depiction of these ships, and they are not exactly replicated. But you see that in the Avadanas, in the Jatakas, and in literary references, you get mention of merchants and traders moving across the seas and the oceans carrying merchandise. In fact, there are three theories of the so-called Indianization of Southeast Asia, an abandoned term, abandoned in favor of localization, but how India and Southeast Asia connected with each other. The theories have been named as the Kshatriya, the Vaishya, and the Brahmin theories. Now, these terms are used just kind of, it's a representative way of describing. Ian Mabbitt lists the works of others before him, F.D.K. Bosch, George Sedes, and others, and talks about the earliest theories proposed by scholars like R.C. Majumdar and all of Indian colonies in the East, Suvarnadvipa or Indian colonies of the East, where the suggestion is that these were politically controlled by Indian rulers, which has been proven as not true. There is no political colonization, except the one reference that you get is the, Chola expedition to Kadaram in the Malay-Thai Peninsula region. But that too was to control ports and to control trade. And you get the reference of, how the Vichatira Torana of the ruler was uprooted, indicating the victory of the Chola. But that was really for commerce, for trade. Now, the other set of theories are trade-related and therefore somewhat incorrectly named Vaishya theories. And they talk about trade as the biggest motivating factor. And of course, religions like Buddhism and Hinduism are known to have been carried along the seas on ships, the going of monks. Even Kaundinya Brahmin went by the sea and reached the shores of the Mekong Delta, where a kingdom called Funan is reported in the Chinese annals. Now, so the routes, the specific routes that they took, and which were the ports of call that were most important to the project. Now, this is just a map and listing the motivations, the motives of long-distance travel, trade, pilgrimage. The third set of theories, incidentally, are called the Brahmin theories. And the Brahmin theory is essentially actually the most wrongly named, but the latest and the most updated and accepted one, which is that it was on the indigenous enterprise of the local rulers and leaders of the various small kingdoms of Southeast Asia who invited learned scholars, be they Buddhist monks or to the Sangha belonging to the Sangha, or priests and Brahmins, to play an advisory and critical role in the running of the kingdom and to create an aesthetics of authority and power for the newly growing kingdoms of Southeast Asia. In support of that, scholars like Harman Kulke and others have indicated inscriptions from the regions of East Kalimantan in Borneo, the Moolavarman's Yupa inscriptions, 7 of them, who mention actually very clearly how Moolavarman, whose ancestor is actually called Kundunga. Now, these adoption of these names of Indian names like Moolavarman, Ashvavarman, or Bhavavarman, so on, are actually the process of Sanskritization of Southeast Asia. Also part of an aesthetics of power there, where his ancestor is called Kundunga, perhaps a tribal chieftain, or some kind of a leader in a setup that preceded this coming of the small kingdoms. Now, he is supposed to have invited Brahmins to his court, and he says, Iha agata. Yaha ana. So that whole thing. Then we know about Kaundinya and the dual ancestry, legend that is recorded in inscriptions of Champa as well as Cambodia that talk about Kaundinya marrying the local Nagi princess Soma. And the children born of the union of Kaundinya and Nagi Soma are said to have been the rulers of Champa and the pre-Angkorian Khmer region. Now, what does this do? If you look at the Prashastis even in India, there is a kind of a legitimation that is drawn. And this Kaundinya Brahmin also appears in Chinese annals. He is called Huntien in the Chinese annals. Now, all of this becomes an aesthetics of setting of power to enable a structure of polity that can give you a structured authority to rule. Now, this is one side of it. But when the trade was happening, where were the first ports of call? What was happening? We know that the monsoon winds, you have the May to October period, where you have the northwest to southeast direction, and then you wait, and then the return is in the opposite direction for a couple of months. Now, that kind of interaction, starting from the Arabian Sea, of course, we are not doing this part at the moment, but coming along here, and Sri Lanka played a very important role as well in the maritime trade, but both along the southeast coast and the eastern coast. Now, this region, this is the Isthmus of Kra, where the land is at its thinnest, and this is the Malacca Straits, the Straits of Malacca. Now, this place, which is called Thai Malay Peninsular region, this particular region, became a very important point of control and grew into a very, very large entrepot with a lot of smaller ports attached to it. One of the regions, which is called Kedatua, is being excavated at a very fast pace by a very young archaeologist in University Science Malaysia these days. His name is Nasha Kao, and he has recently discovered a life-sized Buddha on the walls of a brick stoop. But apart from that, you have sites, the Bujang Valley and then up in Thailand, Takua Pua, all of these are recorded ports. Yes, so here is the focus on the important ports where some of the earliest influences are to be found in terms of the material artifacts. I've been naming some regions, and so let me show it to you. This is Lemba Bujang, which is the Bujang Valley. I will be showing some artifacts from here. This is Peninsular Malay, and up there, which is now to the north in Thailand, you have this site called Takua Pua. To the right, you have important ports like Tambralinga, Chaya, and Lanka Sukha. All of these. Now here in Sri Vijaya, where Yijing is supposed to have rested and learned Sanskrit before coming to Nalanda, you have Palembang, and then later they moved to Jambi. Now Palembang and Jambi became, first Palembang and then Jambi became extremely important controlling ports. And a lot of prosperity here generated very different kind of socio-political organizations than those first kingdoms where the Wokan inscription, the Sanskritization and all was found. These were actually, here you had many itinerant merchants and traders who waited for the goods to come from the South China Sea. Exchange of goods happened, waited for the winds to change, to go back. So there were these temporary settling communities of Indian merchants and traders. From the 10th century, this region also shows a lot of Chinese presence. But the earlier presence here is Indian. And you find Buddhist and Hindu remains in this part. So these are just a few of the artifacts. There are many brick temples found here. Now, unlike the temples that we will look at in a little while from Java, say the Dieng Plateau, or the temples of Mizon, or the Khmer region temples of Sambor, Precook, Angkor, and others, which were state temples. Many of them were state temples, and they were centers of political power and ritual authority. These temples remained modest brick structures throughout, starting from the 4th, 5th century and going up to the Malacca period in the 14th century. So 4th, 5th to the 14th century, you have brick temples, foundation deposits, the Buddhist creed, and this very important stele, which is in the Indian Museum, Kolkata, which was found. This is the Mahanavika Buddhagupta stele belonging to the 5th century here. This is just a rubbing. I do not have a photograph of this extremely important artwork, but I did want to share it with you. And so here it is. You can see how profusely inscribed it is. And it has a stupa over a lotus petal, the under, the harmika, and the chhatras. And what is very important about this, first, it was found in 1834 by Captain James Lowe, and in 1835, he gifted it to the Asiatic Society, now the Asiatic Society of Bengal. It tells us about a Mahanavika, a great sailor, whose name is Buddhagupta. So it tells us about the close linkages between trade and the spread of Buddhism. Now this Mahanavika Buddhagupta is said to belong to Raktamritika. Raktamritika literally means red soil, of course, but this Raktamritika has been traced to Bengal as well as to a region in Southeast Asia. Okay? Now, he visits this northern Malay peninsula, and Professor Peter Skilling, that great authority on Buddhism, has recently translated the inscriptions on the stele and mentions that there are verses he has discovered that are from a Mahayanic text called the Sagarmati Pariprichha, the questions of Sagarmati. It is belonging to the Buddhist Madhyamika sect. And the translation in English of the important portion, apart from the information of Mahanavika Buddhagupta, is, in short, karma is accumulated due to ignorance. Karma is the cause of rebirth. With wisdom, karma is not accumulated. In the absence of karma, one is not reborn. This is courtesy Peter Skilling. These constitute some of the earliest epigraphic references of the close relationship between trade and Buddhism and the different kind of routes, the different kind of journeys that were charted. What is very important to note before we move on from Bujang Valley, where this is a bronze, some people say it is the shikhara, it is the spire of a small replica of a monument. It could even be the lid of a relic casket. It is very difficult to say. This is a small bronze Buddha image, very similar to the Sarnath school that we are familiar with of the Gupta period. And there are many, many more. Now, when these early excavations were done after Captain Law by Quaritch, Wales, just a few years before the Second World War, Singapore was not a separate country. So most of the artifacts coming from Bujang Valley before 1965 have been deposited in the Asian Civilizations Museum in Singapore, and that it has a very, very prized collection of these early vestiges. So before we leave the Bujang Valley, what is important to note is that it was not a kingdom or a center of an organized state. It was more an extensive entrepot. It was a complex of ports loosely knit with other ports, and some became more powerful and extended loose control over the others. So when Palembang and Jambi in Srivijaya became very important, they were actually controlling ports like Kedatua and all at that point. And that's why the Chola expedition needs to be understood, why that control became important. So let's move from here to the organized states or small kingdoms that emerged. Among them, the earliest perhaps is what is recorded in the Chinese annals as Funan. Now, you don't get the name Funan in the Sanskrit inscriptions of Southeast Asia. You don't get the name Funan in the Cham inscriptions, nor in the Khmer inscriptions. You get the name Ishanapura and Bhavapura on the Mekong Delta region. And excavations along the Mekong basin have thrown up many more port cities. And you have, the important site of Ok Eo, which has been beautifully displayed in a gallery in the Museum of Vietnamese History in Hanoi. Whereas this important document of India's connection with erstwhile Champa, now Vietnam, actually lies in an open air There's a shed that has been put, and it is profusely inscribed on 4 sides and is known as the Wokan inscription. It talks about the donation made by a king known as Sri Mara. Now, that has made some scholars link him to the Pandya country in South India, no relative of mine. But I do have a great fascination for Funan and Vietnam. So if there is a karmic connection, then I'm not very sure. Now, you can see this is the box-headed Southern Brahmi script and much debated dates, which range from the 2nd century AD to the 4th century AD. But it talks about Kula Nandana of this royal family. It talks about Rajakula. It talks about a servant. But it does not talk about the kind of a proper, formal political organization and the limbs of a king that you find mentioned, like in the Indian texts, like the Arthashastra and the others. So this seems to be the nascent kingdom changing from a principality, a cluster of polities, to a more unified small kingdom, which was adopting Indic ideas, philosophies, and that included temple building as well. And so along the coasts of the S-shaped coastline of Vietnam, you have the first temples coming up as per inscriptions. The first temple was built in the 5th century in the Mizon Valley, which burnt and which had the linga of Bhadreshwara in it, and therefore the linga was then saved, and another temple was built by a successor king in the 6th, 7th century, and so on and so forth. You keep getting the reference of the linga of Bhadreshwara. When the king changes, it becomes the linga of Shambhu Bhadreshwara. When the next king comes, that name gets a prefix, and Ishvara continues. This is also something you will see, Raja Rajeshwara. These kind of merging of the name of the king with Ishvara and the consecration of the linga. Even in Pattadakal, you get Lokeshwara, Trailokeshwara, and other names attached to Vijayeshwara, which is a practice that is again Indic, that has traveled all the way there. So given this, these are the surviving fragments in stone that you find. I have just assembled them together. It's from one of my papers on the Mizon temples. And no temple survives in its entirety at this early date of the 7th century. Here, what you see is a relief sculpture of a temple carved on a tympanum. And here you see the earliest full from the Pitha to the stupi kind of a temple that is actually a mix of Nagara and Dravida. And this whole idea, one of the things that has stuck like glue is the Pallava influence, the Pallava Granth script, the Pallava influence on the epigraphy, the Pallava influence in temple architecture. Whereas Pallavas and Cholas were deeply connected with Southeast Asia, they were not the only factors influencing connections. The connections were deeply networked and circuitous. And often there were many intra-Southeast Asian presences. So this is the lintel of the doorway, which shows Sheshashayi Vishnu. This is in Mizon, the valley of temples that I was talking about in central Vietnam. You have Sheshashayi Vishnu, but a very localized Vishnu. From his navel emerges Brahma. On two sides is Garuda combating Nagas. But interestingly, inside the temple was a linga. And the first shape of the temple was not walled in like this, but it was an open pillared temple with tiled roofing, pyramidal. That's why this pedestal, which looks like this and has four sides, I have shown you all the sides here, was very decorative because this pedestal was visible from outside and it shows a whole lot of ascetics. These have been identified as Pashupata Shaiva ascetics by some scholars now, and you see some very interesting activities of the rishis in that forested, lush green valley, which is today a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You have Linga Puja happening under a tree. Look at the jata of the rishi. You have two ascetics who are looking at a chart, and one is pointing at the chart. You have one relaxing, and the student is massaging his feet. Always good to have students, but not in Delhi University. We can, okay? That is an old Rishi Parampara practice, not valid anymore. Anyway, now you have here a Rishi is playing a stringed instrument. Lots of interesting things happening. This one is particularly fascinating. He is talking almost as though to a parrot and has a scripture in hand. And the artist chooses to show a parrot. Now please think about it. That was Smriti, parroting of the verses. And in fact, this whole site is very, very exciting, not possible to discuss in its entirety, but this was an important cluster of polity that was moving from south to, first, it was thought to be like, in the Chinese annals, it is mentioned almost like a patrimonial bureaucracy. But we must understand that those who write are writing from the perspective of what they experience. And so a Han period Chinese annal talking about Funan as a patrimonial bureaucracy, actually it was a mandala-like formation of a cluster of polities more in the Indic fashion. Now, here one plays the flute, another is reciting something to a parrot, and this is the pedestal on which the linga was placed. In the second phase, the pedestal became less decorative and walls came up of this kind. Elsewhere, in a volume felicitating Professor M.A. Dhaki, I have traced its relationship to Nagara and Dravida temples and come to the conclusion that it is not a prototype of what later emerged in Mahabalipuram, for example. There is no hara or harantara, no parapet, and it's a very different layout. It does not have the typical southern kapota, but it has a northern kapota palika, so on and so forth. It is at a stage, it has happened at a stage when the regional formations in temple architecture in the south and eastern India were also happening at that time. 7th century is Mahabalipuram. 7th century is also a lot of the Chalukyan temples, and so on. Also in eastern India, Parashurameshwar. So that influence has gone earlier, and the kind of processes happening in eastern India, southern India, and Southeast Asia converge, what is called a process of cultural convergence. Moving ahead, these are on the Dihyang, what is called Dihyang plateau of central Java, absolutely picturesque, and Dihyang means where the gods reside. And when you see that place, no wonder the gods reside. You're in a mist of clouds, and it is absolutely, what did I do? It is absolutely stunning, the kind of vocabulary that emerges there. I'm sorry, once again, it's not moving. Yeah. So these are named after the Pandavas. Chandi Bhima, Chandi Arjuna, Chandi Puntadeva or Panchadeva, Chandi, and so on. That has kind of, along with this idea of the Pallava Granth script having the greatest influence. Incidentally, it is the Shaka era that is followed in a lot of the inscriptions of Champa. And the Shaka era is followed in the Deccan. It is not followed in the Pallava inscriptions. So Professor Jamkhedkar must correct me if I'm wrong. But the Shaka era is a Chalukyan influence. So grouping everything into Pallava is a fallacy that is often now being corrected. These are compared, have often been compared to the Mahabalipuram temples. The Diyang temples are in the late 7th, early 8th century. And the Arjuna Rath, that is Arjuna Rath in Mamallapuram. This is Chandi Arjuna on the Diyang plateau in central Java. Now, we need to have a class in architectural history to sort of convincingly argue that there is no direct influence. There is a visual similarity, but it is very, very different. So you have these corner edicules, but you don't have any of these parapets and smaller edicules, the kutas and the shalas. The whole, the pithas are different, and so on. Here is a discussion of this temple in relief that explains why it is neither Dravidian nor Nagara, but has elements of both, creating something new. Now, ideas traveled sometimes without objects, and these are concepts that traveled through texts, through oral transmission. And so the idea of Meru, for example, has expressed itself in a range of visual vocabularies that are quite distinct. You have the idea of the Meru, which is at the center, which is the tallest point, whose summit is the tallest point on Jambu Dvipa, and whose center is the navel of the universe. And even Kalidas quotes, Sthitaha sarvonnate norvim krantva meru revatmana. So the Raghu lineage is compared with Meru, steadfast as Meru, at the summit like Meru, and the comparison of the Chakravarti with Meru repeats itself in Indic literature. This whole idea of Meru and the cosmology and the organization of the 7 seas and the concentric Sapta Saindhavas, and at the center the Meru, reflects in different visualities. So one concept that travels can give rise to multiple visualities, both within India and outside. And so you have the Meru reflecting in many different ways. Kandariya Mahadev at Khajuraho is a Meru Prasada, where you have the buttress mountains as part of the Uraha Shringas and the summit. The Pitha is the step on which it is. Tanjavur Brihadishwara is a Meru Prasada. And Angkor Wat is a Meru Prasada. But the Cambodians explore Meru, the idea of Meru in their temple architecture very differently from the way we do it. Here is an aerial view of Angkor Wat. And you see how that idea, the Puranic idea, it is part of Buddhist cosmology, it is part of Jain cosmology. It is also very much part of Hindu cosmology, where you have the concentric rings, the enclosure walls, and the creation of a system of moats, which is absolutely unique to. So here you have water organized along it, and the system of barrays and dikes that are created, with this as the Meru and this as the four buttress mountains rising on a step pyramid, is a vocabulary of temple architecture that developed gradually in Cambodia from the pre-Angkorian period temples of the 7th century and go up to the massive Bayon and Angkor Thom and Angkor Wat and all of them. This takes care of multiple requirements. They're taking the idea and making it their own. They are using it for political legitimation, one. But they are also using it for the organization of water and dikes and channels, channelizing the water management requirements. Throughout Cambodia, you have this system of dikes and barrays that enters into its temple design as well. So the economic, the political, and the artistic aesthetic comes together in a very localized manner. Now, that was idea to form. But there is also the visual similarity on many occasions is too strong to overlook the direct connection with visual models. And it is the smaller portable objects that moved along these routes. And so you have miniature stupa models of this kind. This is from the region of Gandhar, a stupa in bronze belonging to the 4th, 5th century. What I call voyaging objects, what some other scholars have also termed as voyaging objects. And here you have a terracotta ceiling. So you also have the temple showing here. And let me link it to the Bodh Gaya temple quickly. So you have portable objects of this kind sharing visual vocabulary across. Now, the question of which artist made it. If it is an absolutely stylistically Gupta-looking object in Southeast Asia or a Pallava-looking object in Southeast Asia, was it made by an artist well-versed in Pallava statuary? Or were artisans going there with traders and merchants? For their communities, they made those humble temples, carried some icons. How was it happening? When it is stylistically local, it is easy. But when it is stylistically similar, like that Amaravati style Buddha, here. This is in the Amaravati school, and it was found in a place called a Buddhist monastic complex called Dongzuang in central South Vietnam. And it was first dated by scholars to the 3rd, 4th century based on the Amaravati school. Later, an extension of the Amaravati school in the 7th, 8th century was discovered in Sri Lanka. And this object was dated closer to the 7th, 8th century because the Dongzung monastery itself was built in the 9th century. So it may have been brought via Sri Lanka. It is, of course, the Amaravati school, but as practiced in Sri Lanka. This whole idea of intermediaries. The life of Buddha, pilgrims' souvenirs that were carried and that were used for votive purposes or for keeping as, something like the Tirthapattas, where the pilgrimage to the 8 important places that the Buddha that is important to Buddhism, Kapilavastu, Lumbini, and Sarnath, Shravasti, are all, those miracles are placed in one stele, and those who cannot go to the pilgrimage can have that stele with them. These carried ideas, object to object. Now, the Mahabodhi temple was also created in the form of replicas, just like those votive tablets or those miniature models of stupas. And these have been found. John Guy has documented 13 of them. Most of them are in museums abroad today. The CSMVS must acquire one on loan for the Southeast Asia. These are absolutely exquisite. You can see Ashmolean, Oxford, Victoria and Albert Museum, London, LACMA, Los Angeles County Museum of Art. They are all replicas of the Mahabodhi temple. And believe it or not, you have actual Mahabodhi temples in a large part of Asia and Southeast Asia. And how did they, the temple didn't move. How did they create it in the likeness of the Mahabodhi temple? So here are the actual, could you please, yeah. So here is a this is of the closest likeness of the Mahabodhi, 13th century Mahabodhi in Myanmar. This is, of course, the much restored Mahabodhi of Bodh Gaya with several intervening restorations from the period of Gyan Siddha, the Burmese king, to the British period renovations and so on. But this is more or less the shape of the Mahabodhi temple in Bodh Gaya. This is Myanmar, Wat Chet Yot in Thailand, and several others, even in China. You have them. How does architecture move and acquire a similarity? Through the voyaging objects, the portability, the manuals perhaps of artisans. There are many ifs and buts, many gaps in our knowledge. But the roots and the analysis of the object itself, the analysis of the monument itself can yield some answers and bring us closer. Next, please. All right. Icons were also influenced and created and pillaged and plundered as war trophies. Now, this is the famous Bhagavati of Po Nagar in South Vietnam. Not very far from the place where that important Wokan inscription was discovered. You can see, of course, that the head and the hands have been changed at a much later date, and that the iconography is very, at some risk I say Chola-like. But this Bhagavati of Po Nagar is known since the 8th century, from the time of a king Satyavarman who ruled in southern Vietnam. There are numerous inscriptions about Bhagavati Kauthareshwari because she belonged to this place called Kauthara in South Vietnam. The ancient names were Sanskritic. Now, she had such potency, missing Devangana Desai-ji, who has written this phenomenal book on Khajuraho and who talks about how the Vaikuntha Vishnu imagery changes so many hands because in the power politics of the region. Now, there was something so potent about Bhagavati Kauthareshwari that she was pillaged, destroyed, taken by sailors coming from Java, thrown into the ocean. The linga was destroyed. Then another charm king builds it again. Another one gives it a gilded appearance. It is once again pillaged. There are about 10 to 11 episodes of the reinstallation of Bhagavati Kauthareshwari in the inscriptions of the region. Now, Today, I'm sorry, but I don't have an image. She is all dressed up, and she looks like a Chinese goddess. She's all dressed up. She has a whole lot of parasols because Vietnam itself, has taken a lot of Chinese cultural elements, and she looks, but she is worshipped as the Lady of Po Nagar. So this is how transformations happen. This is how the meanings of icons change over time. And this, what survives is not the original. This too is a late 10th, 11th century icon. The original, they say, was drowned in the Java Sea. Next. I know that it's time to slowly now wind up. Now this, of course, ties up again with trade. And so I choose Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, Mahakarunika, of great compassion, who became the belief in Avalokiteshvara became at times in the intra-Asian connected histories bigger than Buddha himself. I mean, as a cult, okay? I'm not challenging Buddha's authority. But what I'm saying is why? Because he was the great savior, the Mahakarunika. And he could save you from various fears, Ashta Mahabhaya, Ekadasha, with 11 heads. You have them in Kanheri. The Deccan is the genesis of the Ashtamahabhaya, Avalokiteshvara. And here I would like to show you the important next one. This is an important icon, an early icon. Of course, you have them in various other parts of the Deccan. But here you see Avalokiteshvara just outside the main entrance into Cave 7 in Aurangabad. And he is surrounded by 8 smaller narrative scenes. Those are the 8 great perils or the Ashtamahabhayas from which Avalokiteshvara protects everyone. You can be a robber, a ghost, a sinner. You don't have, anybody, whoever thinks of Avalokiteshvara is protected. And one of them here is savior from shipwrecks, savior from drowning in the sea. So you see a ship with masts, and here you have Avalokiteshvara protecting the sailors. So he became a patron deity of traders, merchants, and sailors. And along the coasts, along the Java Sea, the Gulf of Thailand, the Straits of Malacca, the Thai Malay Peninsula that we spoke about, Sri Lanka, inland river routes, you have numerous Avalokiteshvara shrines, small, humble ones. And these are built by sailors. They also carried small clay tablets as talismans to protect them from shipwreck. So how these traveled with trade, with beliefs, and how the imaginary proceeded into a much larger universe. Let's look at this icon. These are 2 Takuapua Vishnus, roughly of the same date, in the same region, roughly the same province, near that place. One is housed in the Thalang Museum near Phuket. That is the one to your left. It is massive. It's not a portable, small, light image. It is massive. It's more than 2 meters. So is the other one. Now, stylistically, one would like to say that the one to the left, the Takuapua Vishnu in the Thalang Museum, is a Pallava import? Or is it made by an artist well versed in Pallava stylistics and iconography? Or did the artist travel to Takuapua and was there when this happened? How is this so much in the stylistics of the 8th, 9th century South Indian Tondai Nadu iconography and stylistics? Whereas the other one is what you see in a large part of Cambodia and peninsular Thai Malay and many other places. This is a very localized Vishnu, much more muscular. This one doesn't have six-pack abs, but the Phanumda Vishnu has really good six-pack abs. And all my students are very fond of him. So, but this one, this Pallava period, so you have these kind of situations. Of course, we know there is a painting that shows elephants being shipped from long distance. Was this massive sculpture made in India and brought here? Was it made by an Indian artisan? Or was there a school of artisans who also accompanied the merchants and the traders in these regions? Very difficult to say, but that is the riddle of the two Takuapua Vishnus. I think it is time to close, and therefore I request Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee to invite me again to, to talk about the Ramayana in Southeast Asia. I think I will not embark upon that today, but essentially, I have done a close study of this, and I wanted to share it here today, but I think I have already. Should I? A little bit? Yeah? Okay. So essentially, this has to do with how the Ramayana adapts and changes, not only within India, but also beyond the oceanic borders. And not only in the visual arts, but also in literature and in the performance arts. Without theorizing much, I would just like to show you some examples quickly. And that is, the first appearance in the visual domain of an iconic Ram, a sculpture in the round, is actually found in a place called Phunum is a mountain. Phunum Da is in southern Cambodia today, where the incarnation, as part of the incarnations of Vishnu, you have Ram carved in the round. It is not a temple to Ram, it is probably from a temple to Vishnu, because all the incarnations are there. But nevertheless, you have an early, and you have a 6th century inscription called the Phil Kantel inscription, which talks about the donation of the Ramayana manuscript by a Brahmin called Soma Sharman in the pre-Angkorian state of Cambodia. You have a temple to Valmiki in the inscriptions of Prakashadharman Vikrantavarman in ancient Champa. All of this is recorded, and all of this is available to us. And how it transforms is, and I will skip a lot, just some visuals of Vali Vadha from Bantesre, but Rachel Loizu has done some fantastic work on how from about the 9th, 10th century, there was a selective, episodic assimilation of the Ramayana, where the Yuddha Kanda was very important to Cambodia. And so most of the scenes that are taken are those of battle and victory of good over evil. In fact, Surya Varman, to legitimize his rule, That was the state temple of Suryavarman II, Angkor Wat, the famous Angkor Wat. So on the walls of the third gallery of Angkor Wat, you have Suryavarman's procession. And other than that, you have on the wall scenes from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, all showing, say, the Battle of Lanka, the battle between the Kauravas and the Pandavas. Samudra Manthan, which has been replicated in the new Indian Parliament building, is an Angkor Wat Samudra Manthan. Okay, so reverse also needs to be acknowledged. In fact, there was the idea of building a huge Angkor Wat in the eastern Indian state of Bihar, which the Cambodian government objected to, and there was a diplomatic tussle, after which the Virat Angkor Wat was turned into the Virat Ramayan Mandir, and the design of Angkor Wat was merged with that of Tanjavur Brihadishwar and Kandariya Mahadev to create a hybrid that does not do justice to any of the three. But that is contemporary connections. Here is the Nagapasha episode where Rama and Lakshmana are tied in the Nagapasha, which is very famous in Cambodia, but not so much in India. I would like to take you to, okay. In Thailand, the surviving Ramayana literature is all destroyed, meaning the early one is destroyed because of the Burmese invasion in the middle of the 18th century. But it survives in some of the earlier temples. The Ramayana of those temples show links with the Valmiki Ramayana, whereas those that are, that is from the second kingdom, Ayodhya, is named after Ayodhya, and the king is named King Rama, the first. But then you come to the Bangkok period, and the Ramayanas that you find from the Bangkok period actually don't tally with the Valmiki Ramayana, they tally with Kamban's Iramavataram. So there is tally, meaning they show greater similarity with Kamban's Iramavataram. So these kind of changes are next. Hanuman and Ravan undergo major transformations. So Hanuman actually has a paramour by the name Benyakai. And he's quite a romantic person, very colorful person. He has certain encounters with Benjakai and all. And in fact, in Karnataka, a very, very senior scholar, Hanuru Krishnamurti, he explained to me that in the local village Ramayans of Karnataka, you have these colors of Hanuman sometimes showing up. So that, there are many, in fact, Hanuman is, his magical powers, his colorful personality, and his total devotion to Ram. These three qualities make him extremely popular in Southeast Asia. And he is made in an oversized form. My first experience was in Prambanan, where in the 9th century Prambanan temple complex, I saw a 90% Islamic audience there. And the characters of Ram and Sita were being enacted by followers of Islam, but the Ramayana was theirs. You also have, I should end with that shadow puppet, Vayangkulit Kelantan, in northeastern peninsular Malaysia, where, next one. Yeah. So Vayangkulit Kelantan is a shadow puppet theater. One of them, Kelantan is the name of the place. Vayangkulit is the shadow puppet theater in Java, in Malaysia, and in some other places, where you have hikayats. Hikayats are stories, narratives, episodes. So you have hikayat Seri Rama, which is the story of Sri Ram. But you also have Hikayat Maharajavana, that is the Hikayat of Ravan. So essentially Ravanayan. That is Hikayat Maharajavana, where, like many Ramayans here too in India, Ravan is shown in a far greater sympathetic light than in the early Ur text. I should end on one episode from the Vayankulit Kelantan, how cultures negotiate the terrain of an epic that is ever flowing, assimilating, and transforming. And so when Malaysia became more and more Islamic, the Ramayana went through certain changes to accommodate it. And there was a reduction in the large pantheon of gods, and Allah and Adam had to be incorporated into the Ramayana. Now, this is a puppet theater. So there is a spontaneous creativity. At the moment the story unfolds, the audience also contributes. The singer contributes, the lyricist contributes, and the performer contributes. So it's absolutely living in the moment. And so the story becomes that Raja Berma is the ruler of the jinn, of the heavens, the Kalangan, the ruler of the heavens. Raja Berma is no one but Brahma. Okay? Raja Berma, the ruler of the heavens, is threatened by the neighboring kingdom of ogres. And to block that, Raja Berma's son kills the king of the neighboring ogre country and marries the queen, marries his queen, who is a Rakshasi. Now this is Brahma's son marries a Rakshasi. Please draw the parallel from the Indian mythology. And the son born to that Rakshasi, she is not called Kaikasi. She is called something else. And Raja Berma's son is Ravan. Now Ravan is known to create havoc and misdeeds. And to punish him on one of his misdeeds, Raja Berma drops him from the heavens and he lands in the island of Lanka. He lands in the island of Lanka where, upon Allah's advice, Adam is sent to Lanka. And Ravana performs penance and asks Adam to release him from and to free him of his curse. And Adam, upon Allah's advice, says, you are liberated. You and your people build a kingdom in Lanka using 3/4 of the land. Give us 1/4. Now, this is the slow Islamization of Malaysia that is reflected in the transformation of the epic. And this kind of change and continuity process, and not just a rooted monolithic structure transplanted, is what we need to really try and understand more and more. Thank you so much.